What if everything you've heard about Lucrezia Borgia, the incest, the poison, the whispered murders, was only half the horror? What if the real nightmare wasn't that she was a killer, but that she was never allowed to be anything else? Sold into marriage at 13 by her own father, the Pope. Lucrezia's life was a masterclass in manipulation, where love was a trap, loyalty was lethal, and silence was her only defense. Before she turned 20, she'd been married off, abandoned, accused, and erased, used as bait in a game where the prize was power and the price was her humanity. History painted her as a monster, but once you learn who was really pulling the strings, you'll realize Lucrezia Borgia wasn't the villain. She was the victim of an empire that needed one, and her true story is far more disturbing than the legend. She was barely 13 when the Pope sold her future. In a candle-lit chamber thick with incense and ambition, Lucrezia Borgia, soft-voiced, wide-eyed, and still clutching dolls in private, was forced into marriage with Giovanni Sforza, a nobleman more than twice her age. But this was not a union forged in love or even mutual gain. It was a political transaction orchestrated by her father, Rodrigo Borgia, better known to the world as Pope Alexander VI. Her dowry wasn't gold. It was her body, her obedience, her silence. From that moment, Lucrezia ceased to be a daughter. She became a bargaining chip in the most dangerous game in Europe. Her family, one of the most feared and loathed in Renaissance history, used marriages the way others used swords, to conquer, to dominate, to eliminate threats. And Lucrezia was a perfect weapon, beautiful, intelligent, and entirely controlled. Before her 20th birthday, she would be paraded through 3 political marriages, 1 annulment under the humiliating claim of non-consummation, and 1 possible pregnancy so scandalous the Vatican erased all records of it. Whispers of incest with her brother Cesare Borgia swirled like smoke around her every public appearance. She never had to kill anyone to be feared, because her last name did it for her. Forget the poison rings and shadowy murders. The real horror of Lucrezia Borgia's life wasn't the myth. It was the truth. She was born into a world where survival required submission, where escape was betrayal, and where your own family might be the one to end you. History made her a monster. But the true tragedy, she never had the power to be one. Inside the Vatican walls, nothing was sacred. Not even the Pope's own daughter. Rodrigo Borgia ruled as Pope Alexander VI, but he governed like a warlord. Trust was currency, and betrayal was standard practice. In this world of spies, poison, and papal politics, Lucrezia Borgia was less a daughter and more a diplomatic weapon, constantly monitored, endlessly maneuvered. Every word she spoke, every glance she gave, was observed and weighed for political value. Courtiers watched her like hawks, not to protect her, but to report on her. Her virtue was public property, measured, doubted, and exploited as needed. One day, she was the symbol of virgin purity. The next, she was accused of bedding her own brother. Rodrigo and Cesare Borgia didn't shield her, they used her. Her marriages were not acts of care, but strategic placements. Her affections were redirected at will. When a political alliance crumbled, so did her position in it, and when rumors became useful, they were allowed to spread, sometimes even seeded by her own blood. Whether or not the incest ever happened didn't matter. What mattered was that the world believed it could. Lucrezia lived in golden prisons, palaces, convents, courts, but they were prisons all the same. No decision was hers to make. Her name was dragged through every back alley of Rome, while she smiled through papal ceremonies and embroidered gowns stitched with lies. The horror wasn't just isolation, it was the performance of safety while constantly being used, surveilled, and sacrificed. She wasn't protected by the most powerful men in Christendom. She was caged by them. Giovanni Sforza was a political alliance in velvet, until he became disposable. At 17, Lucrezia was married to the Lord of Pesaro, a nobleman twice her age and from a powerful family. The marriage was arranged, celebrated, and then, within 4 years, coldly dismantled. Not because of scandal, not because of abuse, but because Giovanni was no longer useful to the Borgia machine. When Pope Alexander VI and Cesare Borgia shifted their ambitions, they demanded an annulment. Giovanni refused. He knew the humiliation such a claim would bring. So the Vatican forged the path of greatest damage. They accused him of impotence. The Pope's own daughter, it was said, had never been touched by her husband. It was a public neutering, and everyone knew it. Rome laughed. The Sforzas raged. But behind the mockery was something far more sinister. Giovanni Sforza disappeared from court without warning. Some whispered that Cesare Borgia had arranged for a quiet assassination, a blade in the dark or poison in the wine. For days, his fate was unknown. Only later did he emerge. Alive, but disgraced, stripped of honor, and politically broken. He signed the annulment documents in fear, not peace. But while Giovanni survived the scandal, Lucrezia did not escape the stain. The virgin daughter of the Pope was now tainted by implication. Was the marriage never consummated, or was that a lie? Had she betrayed him? Had he abused her? The truth didn't matter. The rumors did. Once again, her body was public property. Her reputation, crafted by men, shattered by strategy, became a canvas for Rome's darkest fantasies. In 1498, Lucrezia Borgia vanished from public view. Officially, she had been sent to a convent, Santa Clara in Spoleto, for spiritual reflection while her annulment was being finalized. Unofficially, she was hiding a pregnancy the church could not explain. No husband, no confession, no father named. Only silence and swelling. Inside the convent walls, Lucrezia gave birth to a boy. The Vatican scrambled. A document surfaced, naming the child Giovanni and listing him as the son of a certain man and Lucrezia. Another version, signed by Pope Alexander himself, declared Giovanni the child of Cesare Borgia. A third document made him the Pope's own illegitimate son. 1 child, 3 fathers, and no answers. Rome didn't ask questions. It whispered them. The scandal exploded. Was Lucrezia seduced by a secret lover? Was she raped? Or was the truth even darker, an incestuous child born from the twisted bond between brother and sister? The lack of clarity became its own weapon. The Borgia name already stank of corruption, but now it reeked of something even worse. Taboo. The baby, Giovanni, was raised under ambiguous care, never fully acknowledged, yet never entirely disowned. A ghost child, passed between households, never free from the shadow of his birth. For Lucrezia, the damage was permanent. No matter how many royal titles she earned later, she could never shed the weight of that unspeakable birth. The truth, if anyone knew it, was buried under papal seals and family silence. But the damage was done. Lucrezia Borgia was no longer a girl trapped in a power game. She was now a symbol of sin, of seduction, of a church so corrupt even its daughters could give birth in the dark, while the world speculated on who, exactly, had opened the door. Cesare Borgia wasn't just Lucrezia's brother. He was her shadow, always near, always watching, and always ready to strike. To the world, he was a cardinal-turned-soldier, a cold strategist with a flair for assassination. But behind the palace doors, he was something far more terrifying. The one man Lucrezia could never escape. Their relationship was close, too close. Letters between them drip with affection that feels unnatural. At banquets, they sat side by side, whispering while others watched. Courtiers speculated. Foreign ambassadors reported rumors of incest. The Vatican denied everything. But Cesare never did. What is certain is this. Cesare didn't tolerate rivals. When Lucrezia began to show affection for men outside his control, blood followed. The most infamous case was Alfonso of Aragon, her second husband, young, charming, and loved by Lucrezia. Cesare pretended to welcome him, then had him stabbed on the palace steps. Alfonso survived the initial attack. Days later, Cesare had him strangled in bed. Lucrezia was said to be holding his hand when he died. Another man, the messenger Pedro Calderon, tried to court Lucrezia discreetly. His body was found in the Tiber River, and a nobleman who dared propose marriage was ambushed by Cesare's men, stabbed over 100 times in a public street. The message was clear. Lucrezia did not belong to herself. Was Cesare protecting her or punishing her, loving her or controlling her? Historians still debate. But for Lucrezia, the result was the same. Every whisper of affection came with a scent of danger. Every man who looked at her risked death. In Cesare's twisted world, love was a battlefield, and Lucrezia was the prize no one else was allowed to win. Alfonso of Aragon was everything Lucrezia Borgia wasn't allowed to have: young, devoted, and dangerously human. At 17, she married him not for politics, but for something rare in her life: real affection. Their marriage was a brief reprieve from the brutality of her world. He gave her tenderness. She gave him trust. It would cost him his life. Cesare Borgia didn't see a husband. He saw a threat. Alfonso was the illegitimate son of the King of Naples, a potential ally one day, a liability the next. When papal alliances shifted, Cesare acted without hesitation. One summer night in 1500, assassins attacked Alfonso as he left the Vatican gardens. He was stabbed repeatedly and left for dead, but he lived. For a moment, it looked like he might survive. Lucrezia tended to him herself, refusing to leave his bedside. For days, she begged for protection. Cesare promised he'd be safe. Then, on August 18th, as Lucrezia stepped away, the guards entered. Alfonso was strangled with a silk cord. Quiet, efficient, final. She returned too late, or maybe not at all. Accounts differ. What's certain is that her husband died in the Pope's palace, under her brother's watch, with no one held accountable. Lucrezia reportedly collapsed in grief. But grief meant nothing in a house where love was weakness and emotion was a tool. The murder was never publicly condemned. Rome understood the rules: politics over people, ambition over affection. Lucrezia was a widow again, this time not by scandal, but by blood. And once more, her tears meant nothing. Her second marriage had been real, which made its destruction all the more necessary. Lucrezia Borgia arrived in Ferrara draped in jewels, praised for her beauty, and burdened with a reputation that preceded her. At 21, she became Duchess, an official title, a noble household, and a new beginning. But thrones don't guarantee freedom, they just change the prison walls. Her third husband, Alfonso d'Este, was wary from the start. He had married a Borgia, not a woman. Rumors followed her like a shadow: poisoner, seductress, traitor. She was watched constantly, by his court, by his family, by the ghosts of the men her bloodline had buried. So she adapted, smiled more, spoke less, played her role with grace so perfect it became its own disguise. Behind the scenes, Lucrezia wielded quiet influence. She funded artists, hosted salons, corresponded with monarchs. She became the elegant face of Ferrara's growing prestige. But her control was always conditional. The moment she overstepped, she was reminded who really ruled. She bore Alfonso's children, attended his functions, and kept her secrets close. Whispers returned. A noblewoman died after a banquet. A rival fell ill. The rumors blamed Lucrezia's ring, her wine, her hands. Nothing was proven, but nothing needed to be. Her past made guilt easy to believe. Whether she actually poisoned anyone remains unknown. But in Ferrara, belief was more powerful than truth. Was she finally free? Some say yes, pointing to her diplomacy, her intellect, her autonomy. Others argue she simply learned to survive better, to be less obvious. A duchess, yes, but one wrapped in silk, watched by servants and surrounded by locked doors. Her crown was real. So was her cage. Lucrezia Borgia's legacy was never hers to write. The moment she entered history's spotlight, others began crafting the story. They called her an alchemist, a seductress, a mistress of poison. Golden-haired and soft-spoken, she became the Renaissance's perfect villain, a woman too beautiful to trust and too powerful to be innocent. Rumors claimed she wore a hollow ring laced with poison, able to slip fatal doses into a goblet with a flick of her finger. That she kept a list of enemies, each crossed out in time. That her lovers died not from heartbreak, but from calculated elimination. In banquet halls, nobles glanced nervously at their wine. If Lucrezia smiled, they drank with hesitation. But where's the evidence? The Vatican archives hold no record of her poisoning anyone. Court documents don't tie her to a single confirmed murder. And yet, history insists. Why? Because Lucrezia lived in the shadows of powerful, dangerous men. Her father, a corrupt pope. Her brother, a ruthless assassin. Their crimes were real, their victims countless. But public image required a distraction, a scapegoat. A beautiful woman made the perfect cover. Lucrezia's myth was born in the spaces left by male ambition. She may have played along. Maybe she whispered threats when needed. Maybe she knew too much to be truly innocent. But the monster history paints, a woman dripping venom and sleeping her way through the court, feels more like projection than fact. A woman feared not for what she did, but for what she might have been capable of. In the end, Lucrezia's greatest crime may have been surviving in a world that wanted her broken, and for that, they turned her into a legend soaked in blood. At 39, Lucrezia Borgia's body finally gave out, after years of pregnancies, miscarriages, and quiet suffering behind royal walls. Her final labor broke her. In June 1519, she gave birth to a stillborn daughter, and within days, she was gone. Fever consumed her. Her body, worn from years of obligation, couldn't survive another demand. To outsiders, her death looked peaceful. A duchess mourned by courtiers, buried in a Franciscan habit to signify piety, but inside those walls, it felt like the final cost. Lucrezia had paid with her youth, her freedom, her voice, and now, her life. This wasn't a romantic end. It was exhaustion, a woman who had endured too much for too long. Some saw it as a release. In death, she no longer had to smile through betrayal, pretend loyalty to men who used her, or bear children for dynasties that never truly welcomed her. But others knew better. Her death wasn't freedom. It was the last act in a lifelong performance she was never allowed to abandon. The tragedy didn't end with her burial. History refused to let her rest. Her name became a whisper of corruption, seduction, poison. Centuries later, she is still invoked as a symbol of evil, her real story buried deeper than her bones. There was no monument, no lasting tribute, just a name dragged through time, distorted beyond recognition. Her crimes were mostly imagined. Her suffering was very real, and her death, like her life, became a tool in someone else's narrative. Lucrezia Borgia didn't die with dignity. She died in silence, just as she had lived, a prisoner to her name, to her blood, to the men who shaped her world. Lucrezia Borgia has been called many things: murderer, temptress, puppet master. But she was never allowed to speak for herself. Her letters were filtered. Her image was painted by enemies. Her silence became the canvas on which others drew monsters. Stripped of legend, her life reads less like a villain's tale and more like a case study in survival. She was born into a world where power was absolute, where family meant allegiance, not affection. Her father wore the papal crown and used it like a sword. Her brother killed with impunity. And she? She endured. She adapted. She played the roles they wrote for her: virgin bride, scandalous widow, obedient duchess. She didn't start wars or sign death warrants. She didn't control armies or dictate policy. Yet she became the villain of Renaissance Europe. Why? Because it was easier to blame the woman than confront the system that built her cage. Easier to believe she was poisoning wine than admit that she had no choice in who she married, no say in who died around her, no voice loud enough to matter. The real horror isn't what Lucrezia did. It's what was done to her, the way her life was rewritten before it even ended, the way her silence was weaponized, the way her memory was dragged through centuries of slander while the men who used her were canonized or forgotten. We don't know what Lucrezia Borgia truly thought, what she felt, what she would have confessed if given a safe moment to speak freely. That's the tragedy, not the myth, not the poison, but the absence of her own words. And maybe that's what she feared most. Not death, not scandal, but vanishing without ever being understood, and that even now remains her cruelest fate.